Awesome. Okay. Okay. I'm really, really thankful that you had time to do this. And just to like get to know you better. And so San Diego Flute Retreat is a very intimate, like retreat. And so I think it's such a great way to, I don't know, to have musical vulnerability with people. So we do have a list of questions, but if I can just kind of introduce you to our community and then go from there. Sound
Yeah,
good?
sounds
Okay.
perfect.
So first, I am Toni Cortez-Aguilar, one of the co-founders and facilitators of the retreat. We have Valerie McElroy with us as well, and the wonderful Dr. Chelsea Tanner to introduce you guys and kind of ask some questions as we lead into the flute retreat. We only have day passes available, which is really incredible. But just to kind of get your thoughts on pedagogy and flute playing, what you love about it, and yeah, anything you want to add, Valerie?
No, I'm just to echo what you said, we're really excited to have Chelsea with us. It's been really nice getting to know you, through your platforms,
Mm-hmm.
but this is kind of like a get a little bit closer
Yeah.
if we can, because like Tony was mentioning, it's become this little, it's a burgeoning little tight-knit community for San Diego Flute Retreat. So it's really nice to kind of get to know each other on a more human level as people who all love the same thing. So yeah, we've got a few questions for you, and we will likely go off script at some point, as we always do, which hopefully that's fine too. So first question is kind of general. We know that you're very active in both the performance and teaching arenas. Just tell us what you've been up to recently, what projects you've got going.
Yeah, so I have been doing a lot more private teaching lately, both in person and online. I teach at the Colburn Community School in downtown LA. And I love that. But I'm sort of just getting my feet on the ground. And here, I live in Long Beach, and so I moved to California about a year and a half ago. So I feel like I'm still getting my feet on the ground here, trying
Yeah.
to, you know, feel out like where's the flute community, where can we create community within music here. So that's something I've been really trying to dedicate my time to as well. But I'm also a mindset coach for musicians, and so I've been putting out a lot of like content on Instagram and on YouTube and my podcast and different things just to facilitate resources for musicians who don't feel empowered and to sort of take their power back in a lot of ways because I think even people not even with careers in music. I coach people who are they just have had bad lesson experiences prior and they have this perfectionism that lives inside them and they still are dying to play the flute or play their instrument, but something's holding them back and they love it, but they can't quite access the point where
Mm-hmm.
they can do it every day. It doesn't feel good anymore. And so that's what I love helping people with. Because I think there can be a balance. There can be a way to relate to your instrument differently. So um, those are my coaching and my teaching, and those are sort of my projects I have at the moment. And I'm in a flute quartet called Emissary Quartet, and we are finishing our debut album recordings in May.
Yay!
Yeah, I know.
Congrats!
Yeah, we got to commission a work by Nikki Sun, and she's an amazing composer. We got a grant to fund it, which is really awesome. And so we're just always working on projects with that quartet, and that's like a passion of mine is
Yes.
that quartet for sure.
That's so awesome. And it's a lot of work that goes into that, I know. So that's a really cool accomplishment to like have that, project near its completion. So you can share your baby with the world, the album you've worked on. That's really cool.
Yeah, yeah, we're super excited about it, and I think we're very close to it being just like the music, like getting together and rehearsing and like recording is actually becomes the easy part after all the
Yes,
logistical stuff.
exactly. So true.
Yeah,
So true.
all the
That's really
logistics, all
awesome.
the things. Congratulations on that. That's great.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, that's super fun.
My next question is about master classes and how you work them. And like, what are your priorities as far as conducting a master class?
Yeah, so I'm always there. I'll tell you just my philosophy around
Yeah.
like how I approach and go into it as like when I teach a master class. I'm always looking for what is the one thing that's going to create the most change in a player. That could be a concept, that could
Mhm.
be something, but usually it's something more fundamental. And what I love to do is create like a space to experiment. So I said, let's just, is it okay if we experiment with your sound? So we don't have to keep anything. We're just trying stuff.
Mm.
And so I really like that. And then we'll keep it if the student can hear the difference,
Mm.
right? If they can't hear it, then it doesn't matter if I can hear it, doesn't matter if the audience can hear it, you know? But what's great in a master class is like, the student gets confirmation that like a bunch of people also heard it, you know? So I think that that's a really great way to kind of affirm if something has changed or not. Um, but I like to look at things from the sort of fundamental principles of flute playing and see if there's a perspective shift that can happen. So it's not so much about accurately like hitting the notes or even the notes at all, but
Yeah.
maybe if there's a concept of sound, maybe if there's maybe if something's happening with technique or evenness, there's I'm like, here's all of the things we can troubleshoot with. Let's experiment with each of them. Let's see what works for you. And so instead of leading from the music, I sort of come at it from like a holistic perspective, like the whole person perspective, instead of, oh, what is this note telling me I need to do? It's like, okay, I'm using the music as a resource for my creation of sound, right? But it's not the thing I'm like honed in on.
Mm.
I
Hmm.
Yeah.
think that then it's much easier to express style and talking about things like style in different pieces when we come at it from that place. So I like to go from larger concepts and then, okay, how does that break down into this moment in this piece or whatever that might be. So it's much less about let's get it perfect and let's taper here, do this thing here, like nitpick. I don't know, and more of like, oh, let's do this thing that would allow you to implement that if you want to in the music. So it's not prescriptive as much as it is like conceptual. If that makes sense. And just a big experiment, honestly, at the end of the day.
Yeah. That's awesome.
I
I think that addresses
love
all.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. I love that you said, I was literally just talking with a student about this last week, and I say this all the time, but I love that you said, it doesn't matter if I can hear it. It matters if they can hear it. Like they have to be able to hear it. So I say that as like a mantra. If you can hear it, you can play it. You're kind of your audiation inside is going to kind of dictate where you can go. And
Mhm.
so we sometimes we get so bogged down in the playing, but we can't play what we can't hear internally. So it's nice. I feel like some of the most successful master classes are the ones, like you said, that focus on, do you hear a difference between this and this, and what do you think about that? Do you like that? Does that resonate with you in this moment? Do you feel like it's something you want to play with more? Or is it something that just doesn't kind of sink in which case it's let's move to something that does. Like that is such a valuable thing to kind of hone in on rather than getting like super granular. It's just about kind of like expansion of the inner ear. And I know that when people get nervous, sometimes that it can be hard to kind of pull them into that space. But I like the fact that if that's kind of like the goal of the masterclass approach in general, I'm hoping people kind of settle into that. And it's just like, oh, it's not actually about the tiny, tiny, tiny things. It's about like what I can conceptualize in my ear and how I can play with it. I love it.
Yeah. And also if we're just thinking about 1,000 little tiny things, I'm exhausted, right?
Yes.
But if here, like if it's all consolidated in your ear, And then we in the class work on how do you get that? Like bridging that gap of
Yes.
what do I actually want and how do I do that physically? Then we can like workshop that. That's the most exciting thing to me.
Love it.
Yes.
Love it, love it, love it. And I think, yeah, I think our SDFR retreaters will love that as well. Will really love that approach. Um, is there a difference between your approach when you're working with a young flutist who's maybe majoring in music or intending to go into um, performing, teaching music, versus working with those who play flute strictly because they love it? It's not necessarily something that they do for a living. It's something that they do because it brings them enjoyment and because if they find it fulfilling. Do you have different approaches when you're working with, students of those kind of camps?
Um, I would say the biggest difference is like I think that I always try to check in with the goals of my students always because if a student wants to go into music, my I'm going to okay, I think I'm going to start that sentence over. My goal is to have my students hear what I'm hearing and gain a perspective in that way. Because if a student is going into music and they can't hear that they're rushing or they can't hear that they're, and then I think that there are certain things that would help them in a specific event, like an audition for a school, something like that. And I think it is my responsibility as a teacher to convey what's kind of the level expected? Like, what are these things? Not to push them there, but to make them aware so that they can hear the difference between that and their playing, and so they can bridge the gap. And so, if that means I have to be like, hey, I said we were doing this, and I think that maybe this could use a little extra time this week, or this or that, right? I'm not one to be like, you're not going to do it. You're not going to make it unless you practice this much. Like that would never come out of my mouth. But I also see a lot in, I have many, many students who are just adults playing for fun, which is some of my, I literally just came from a lesson. That's who I was teaching. And I love it. But I think a lot of times, there's this, desire I see to improve so drastically that frustration ensues. So I tend to see both ends of the spectrum in sort of a different way. I don't think that I definitely would never take someone who's not going into music less seriously, if that makes sense. I don't think I teach them that much differently. It's all the same at the
Yeah.
end of the day. I think it's just the agreed upon goals that I always sort of approach it with. And if someone is just playing for fun and I can see that it's frustrating them, like, let's take a week off that. What are we doing? Like, let's like make this fun again. Like this is
What are
not
we
that
doing?
serious.
Stop for a little bit.
Like if someone's like, oh my gosh, I feel so tense and blah, I'm really like, I'm like, okay, let's
Yes.
scrap it for a week and let's come back to it in 2 weeks. I don't know.
Yes.
It's like we get to make up the rules. Do you know what I mean? Which is like so much fun. But I think, yeah, I think that there's less of a structure, which can be amazing. But I feel like a lot of times, sometimes we want results so quickly that like it can be frustrating and to kind of zoom out and come back from it. Either, but I guess that's how I would answer that question of like teaching people differently. But only because I feel like a responsibility both to like if we're just having fun, I feel like we need to have fun. And if we're like, I have an audition on this day and it's in 3 weeks, like we have a responsibility for that too.
Right.
So it's sort of, and the responsibility isn't to the audition, it's like the comfort of the student in the audition. So I think that's yeah, the way I would answer those two.
That makes
No, so
perfect
good.
sense. Go
It
ahead,
does.
Toni.
Talking about like, building the bridge, I think with adult students, it's like they are some of my favorite to work with, but sometimes that gap seems so big.
Mhm.
Like I can hear what I want to sound like, but I'm here. Right. And so the gap seems so much wider than when you're working with like a music major or someone getting ready for an audition. And so helping that gap seem less scary or less daunting and then just kind of breaking that down is really, really important. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think adult students have such developed ears and they
Yeah.
get into it like it's this Ira. Have you heard this Ira Glass quote? He's like an NPR host, and he says, we get into art because we have good taste, and if we're and the thing that's discouraging is like we can't match it yet.
Yeah.
Like living in
Yeah.
that space, that's that discomfort that is so often like makes us quit or not want to do it, but it's sort
Mhm.
of like being able to stay there, bridging that gap, and I don't think it ever really closes. And when it
Yeah.
gets bigger again, like it'll like keep going. And whenever I remember, I think I heard some people at NFA this year, and my gap went like, oh,
Mm.
and I'm like, now I'm here. I'm like, oh, this feels bad, but it's exciting because then I get to,
Yeah.
uh, fidget. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I totally agree first. And two small things to add when I'm working with someone who's kind of in that space or I'm in that space, just like what you said, sometimes you get to a point where you're like, oh, like you said, it never stops. So no matter how many years you've been playing or how much professional playing you do or teaching, like you get to these level up points. You're like, I finally get something. Like I've been doing it, but something finally clicked, like in my ear or my body responded in a way that I'm like, oh, that's what that feels like to execute. I can't always do it, but I get it. So now like the gap goes like this because our musicality has jumped. And
Hmm.
so going back to the idea of like discomfort or frustration, first of all, that's all very real. But not to like Jedi mind trick it, but I try to help myself and others to be like, but there's something enjoyable about that process. Like as frustrating as it is, there's something there's a lesson in like enjoying that process or finding fulfillment. Sometimes that's the phrase I prefer, like finding fulfillment in that process. It's uncomfortable, but we're moving. And it might not be as fast as we want, but like we're moving and we're moving towards something that we like or love or appreciate or find beauty in. And that movement is like life. So there's something fulfilling about it. Yes, it is frustrating, but also it's fulfilling. And also there's like a lesson in how to enjoy it. Because yes, there's not going to be always that goal of like, I have for some students or some flutists, I have an audition to meet, or I have a deadline, or I have a performance. It truly, the whole goal is the enjoyment of the process. So like learning how to live in the gap and move through the gap at whatever rate we're moving and find some kind of like fulfillment in doing that. That's kind of like part of, I think, the lesson. And it's a lesson for me too, because I think all of us get to a point where we're just like, I'm hitting a wall. Like I can hear something, but I can't do it. Or I know this thing and why can't I? And it's like, oh, breathe and find like the enjoyment in the process. And ultimately, we get frustrated because we care. So that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Like, we're only mad because we care so much about this.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it would not be a big deal. No one would bother. So, like, that frustration is an indication of love in a way. It's like care. And we care about it so much. And we have that taste. And so, like, we want to pursue it, which that's part of being alive. I think it's, in a way, good.
Yeah, it reminds me of this. I'm sorry, I'm like throwing out quotes or like vague references
Love
to
it.
music today, but this is actually one quote from Martha Graham. I remember Jeannie Backstresser read this quote to us, like my first class with her, and she says it's like it's we have this as artists like this divine dissatisfaction, this blessed unrest that like makes us more alive than the others. And I think
Yes.
that thing like inside of us that like we can't like shake it, you know. It's like why am I still doing that, you know? But I'm feeling frustrated and dissatisfied all the time, but I still can't stop, you know, like, but I think that that's the beauty of it. It's like being able to hold both sides of those things and still like keep going. And it is like discomfort on your own behalf, sort of, you know.
Yes, exactly. And I think the community, which kind of gets us into our last couple questions, I think the community we build around that is really important because on an island, it could be really easy to get out of whack. So, like that oddly beautiful phenomenon can kind of go really dark and get really heavy and really hard. And that's why San Diego Flute Retreat and other spaces like this I find so important because we talk to other people who experience this frustrating love thing with our art and with our life and with our care and like the human experience part of this, like we the connection around it I find very important. There was a point in my just music career where I felt very isolated, and that was when I hit burnout. The there was a direct correlation, I think, between how isolated I was and how burnt out I got. And I think once more robust connections with each other are built, it becomes easier and again more enjoyable to go through this and to choose each day to continue to love learning about our craft and the beauty of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I think it's so important to have just conversations or shared experiences. We experience so much of that frustration alone, that like dissatisfaction alone, and it's not, and it's this weird thing because I think especially as music like career musicians, it's like, oh, you do what you love. Like it does not feel like I love it a lot of the time, you know. And you know, it's like because it's so much hard work, you're in a room by yourself. So taking those feelings out of there and discussing with them with other people when you don't know if they also feel that, it's
Yes.
really hard. And I get because I talk about all this stuff on Instagram, I get so many DMs saying like, I didn't know anyone else felt this way. You know, I like didn't know other people felt like, you know, they weren't good enough at their instrument. I didn't know all of this stuff. And I think that that's really hard because I literally will say something and people are like, "Oh my gosh, you're in my brain." I'm like, "We're this
Yes.
one brain at this point. Like everyone's been through it." Which is why I think like I think creating a community like you have is so amazing because you know, we all speak the same language, not only like, you know, literally or even just flute language. Like we all have a shared experience that
Yeah.
is so unique that there is this like next level of ability to relate to each other. And I'm gonna quote Jeannie Baxter again. She said, "You will never be relate to anyone more than the person in the warm-up room next to you in an audition." You know, and I was like, yeah, we're all like competing. There's always this sort of weird comparison stuff, but like these are, you know, musicians are like my people because
Yes.
we all have that shared experience, and like being able to actually lean into that is super special and not found like everywhere, you know. So I think it's so important to be able to talk about it.
Yeah. All right. So we've talked a lot about bridging the gap and taking time to experiment with our sound, to be able to find the joy and the enjoyment of playing the flute. And I think that's so important for our retreat participants because this is meant to be fun. And we are stuck so much in the, oh, I have to play this perfectly. We lose that. But then also the community of like just creators. Sure, we're flute players, but we are creating. We are taking time out of our lives to make some light, which I think is so, so important right now. And that's really why I'm looking forward to the flute retreat because last year we just it was just such a great group of people. And to see people just kind of like settle in and to realize like I can be musically vulnerable here. I can be authentic with myself. The biggest like my biggest takeaway from our retreat last year when Valerie and I were kind of like, debriefing on everything was like, that was the most integrated I had felt in a long time.
Mm.
Um, and that's all I can say about it. I felt like I got to utilize all parts of myself in facilitating, in just listening, just being around the people. And so I know that is like that's something I really want to create that environment for people. And we do have most of our people are amateurs and hobbyists. And so when working with them, and we've talked about like, I'm going to go off script a little bit with our questions, but like helping them build that bridge, that gap. Have you thought about what type of workshops you're going to be bringing in for them? So what are their to-dos, Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think my whole approach is giving students ways to troubleshoot. Like if I basically if I have any age student, I'm always like, how does the flute work? Let's talk about how the flute works actually. And not only that, building that from the ground up, like faster air, higher notes, slower air, lower notes, like all of these things that are fundamental principles of the instrument. How do we manipulate the speed of the air, the volume of the air support, all those things so they can like build off of each other. So if something's missing, you don't know what it is, you can just try something like on a list. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, let's try that. Let's try this. So it doesn't feel like, oh, I have to do this. Oh, I got to do that. It's like, oh, let me try this to see if it works. And so it's more of an experimentation and creation process than, oh, my teacher told me this. I got to do this. I got to remember that, and it's more, I think it's more creative in that way. But I love giving those things in every sort of category. So like logistically playing the flute. That's a whole thing. Giving ways to experiment with sound, with technique, with evenness of fingers. There's like so many different ways to go out about every single fundamental, and so many things to take into account and how they relate to each other. But building on top of that, it's also that's great. But if we focus too much on that part of it, we don't get to we don't kind of balance it out with creative thinking and a creative practice. And I think the thing that you were talking about in terms of like integration and how to bridge, I think so much of how to bridge the gap is how do I use like my whole human experience and be creative in this field when I have music on a page that I need to adhere to, and like that's a really hard place to be because it's like I'm so focused here that I don't take my whole self into it all of the time. But how do I express an idea that I have of this music logistically in my body so it comes out of my flute? And how do I use and this is where I sort of take from my coaching background,
Mhm.
from how do I use the emotions that I have felt in my life as resources for how I set up my body, for how I relate to the music, for what this could evoke, and just experimenting with how I can relate to the music I'm actually creating in a way that feels good in my body, you know? And so I think that that's a really untapped resource we don't talk a lot about as musicians. We talk about the emotion of the music. We talk about like the implied emotions and phrasing, and how to create those things. And I love breaking that down. Like, okay, what do we do flute wise? Like, let's talk about all of the different tools we can utilize physically to make that sound happen. But then also, how am I feeling in my body? So I'm not practicing um, like anxiety in association with this excerpt, or
Mhm.
fear in association with this piece. I think that sometimes if we practice in a certain emotional state, we don't necessarily even realize it. And if it's very stressful for us, then it doesn't feel good when we do it. We don't want to practice it. But it's also translates to on a stage, it's going to be really hard to reach for a really conducive emotion to performing if you've wired in anxiety. Right. So just becoming more aware of the body and the emotions that you have um, as you're going about this experimentation and creative process, where you can pull from like really tangible tools of, I got to figure this out in my instrument logistically, but that is in service of this idea or the other side of the bridge, like other side of the gap we want to get to, So,
Yeah.
so it's sort of like, I think such an advantage in a way to have that other side, because it's like, then everything we do is in service of it. But if the way we're going about it is hunkering down and getting anxious and stressed, like the end is not going to sound like we want it to, because likely it's not going to sound anxious and stressed. It's not what we're going for most of the time. I mean, it depends on the piece, but um, yeah, I think that tangible ways to troubleshoot is always what I'm after, because then it can become a creative process instead of dictating, this is how this should go, this is what this should be, and this is what the way you should practice. Like I think that there's an infinite number of ways to like get to where you want to be with a piece or something like that in your playing, and there will never be two paths that are the same. So the idea that I would prescribe a path seems counterproductive in my opinion, but yeah, that's sort of what how I always approach like giving tools, so that there's a list you can take home. you
Mhm.
know
Yeah.
in terms of like concepts, applying them, exploring and stuff like that.
Something you said remind me of one of your recent videos where you talked about what is most important, practice or mindset. You're like, you could practice, but your mindset could undo it. So maybe mindset is most important. There's a Pavlovian thing that can happen. Like you're saying, we associate this excerpt with stress,
Mhm.
maybe not realizing it. The whistle goes off, the drool happens. Like you actually have a response. I noticed that recently with something that I was playing. And I noticed when I was just like, okay, I'm going to experiment, I'm going to try something. If I like tangibly try to associate this with something else,
Yeah.
and I'm not going to like dictate what it is, I just want to associate it with something different and see what happens. And then I was like, oh, okay, that was cool. I like that better. Let me see if I can now more intentionally, associate it with something.
Mhm.
And it's amazing the difference that kind of makes. So it speaks to kind of that mindset. And it's not something that we perfectly can, control. I don't want to say control like it's something but it is something we can be mindful of. And just that first step can really help in how we approach something. Just knowing that some things are maybe we may be doing or experiencing some things just without being aware of them. So just being aware is like over half of the battle sometimes. And knowing that this thing is possible can open up the door and can free us up to maybe walk through it.
Totally. Yeah. And I have an entire process I work through with, and I do this in my performance anxiety lectures too, of like, oh, think about that excerpt that you get stressed about. Like, how does your body feel? Right. And then we reassociate. And so I take people through an entire process of like practicing the reassociation. You don't have to practice your instrument to do that,
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
right? But when you come back to it, that emotion is going to be so much more easily accessible because we've already practiced the emotion you want to feel in association with the piece or passage that is making you do this. you
Mm-hmm.
know?
It's a good
Yeah.
workshop.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think we want that workshop.
Let's do it. Yes.
Do you find, so as you're talking about this, I'm imagining, 20-year-old Toni who was like not ready for any of that. I was like, no, I need you to tell me what to do. Tell me exactly what to do. Like I was not ready for that amount of freedom, I guess. So do you find that all of these things, are they more effective with adult students or a little bit more like more mature musicians?
I do. Yeah, I do
Yeah.
think so. I actually, because, and it's so funny. It's like we always hear people say, like, the more life experience you have, the more of an art, more you can draw from in your artistry. And I think that, that's true in this case too. People are more aware generally, the more, rather than like teaching, high school students, or middle school students, they don't they haven't experienced the language of music for as long. They haven't like that's a whole language. We can hear and we know how to speak through our instrument, and like knowing that and being aware of that, I think is something that adult students generally have a lot more access to, and can kind of understand more deeply. But I also think that they have more experiences to draw from emotionally. And I think that that actually uh, can can be really helpful when doing work like this. If I was, if I'm helping a student create a resource state and they're 14, and like I think we could get to a place where that would make sense, but they might be like, why are we doing this?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
So I think in that way, they're unable to see a bigger picture, whereas I think adult students can see it always. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just another reason why I love adult students. Like I
Mhm.
just there's so much magic and power there, I think.
Yeah. And it's so fun to I think that my excitement when you just described what we were going to be talking about today, which is pedagogy and flute and learning the flute and approach, I'm like, that's all I want to ever talk about. And I think that is shared because there's a curiosity in how to go about the instrument that I think younger students are like, just tell me.
Mhm.
And so if younger students are just like, tell me, I mean, I don't. I ask them so many questions. They're so annoyed. Like, what do you hear? What do you notice? And they're like, I'm like, do it again, pay attention. You know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or sometimes I'm like, I'm going to ask you this question at the end. So just know that, but I think there's a curiosity in adult students that I think younger students don't have the capacity to even know to be curious about certain things that is just so much fun to explore because I think the most interesting questions and explorations come out of it. Yeah.
And it's a trust thing too. So
Mhm.
we're reminding them to be curious, and maybe some of them are inherently curious, but don't trust the curiosity in this space. But like this is actually where you should be most curious. Like let the curiosity freak flag fly. Like we're all nerds here. Ask all the questions. One try all the things to the point where now I'm irritated because you are off doing whatever you're doing. It's just like, but I would rather that because it teaches like when Toni was saying like 20-year-old Toni, a lot of us when we were younger and we were going through our music preparation, in university or whatever, we're in spaces where sometimes we feel like, well, I don't really trust myself to be curious, or if someone asked me a question about something that I heard, maybe I'm wrong. Or
Mhm.
maybe like I thought I heard something, but probably no. Maybe they'll just tell me. Like I just your ears are better than mine, or you know better. But the inherently personal part of this, it doesn't work for that part, right? If the journeys are all like fingerprints, so like my fingerprint won't do all that much for you, but I can help you to explore yours, which is the cool part.
Yeah, I think about teaching so much more as guiding and facilitating rather than telling. You know? I think that that's something that I think creates more confident students as well, because their opinion is taken into account. If I'm the source of their opinion of their own playing, they need me to feel confident. And so I think that that's such a disservice.
How sustainable is that? You know,
Yeah.
it's not really. Yeah.
Yeah, and I definitely experienced that where I would outsource my validation and opinion of my own playing to my teacher, and I might, after studying with them, my confidence just went through the floor, and I had to just find it.
Yeah.
And luckily I had another teacher who was like, well, "What do you like about this?" I'm like, "Oh, I don't know." And she was like, "How are you, like, how are you playing this? Why are you playing it this way?" I was like, "I think it's how you want me to play it." She's like, "That's the wrong answer."
Empowerment. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I think that there's a lot of layers to this, and just like the care that we take with, I think, valuing the perspective of the student, because at the end of the day, if I'm going into a lesson, my ears aren't the one I'm concerned about. I don't, I'm going to hear what I hear, but I'm interested what they're hearing
Yes.
and what they can do it, because I'm only there an hour,
Hmm.
maybe, a week, and they hear themselves the rest of the time. So yeah, I totally agree. It's like, it's such a, there's so many different ways to go about it that will elicit totally different results.
We saved the hardest question for last, Chelsea.
Okay.
This is the hardest question. She's like, what are you gonna ask me? If you could collaborate with any musician, living or dead, who would it be and why?
Oh my
I
gosh.
told you it's the hardest question, but it's the hardest question. Any musician, living or dead, one, who and why?
Um, I'm just, I'm gonna say someone recent and current. I am loving Caroline Shaw, the composer. Do you know who
Mm,
she is?
I've heard. Hmm.
Yeah. Um, I saw her play, or she and So Percussion collaborated on an album that won a Grammy recently, and I think that a flute piece with her or something would be so cool. That's sort of who comes to mind at first. And because I think like creating music, new sounds in like today is so important, I
Same.
think
Yeah.
that's something I would say, um, for sure. I wish I played other genres. I'm trying to learn how to improvise recently. So because I'm like, okay, this is, if I can't just play the flute without music, like I feel so
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
frustrated
Right.
by
Right.
that. And so I'm trying very hard to uncomfortably branch out, and just embarrassing myself in front of myself at this point.
I love that.
But yeah, I would say probably Carolyn Shaw. She's the top of mind right now, but and just like different sounds, using electronics, using like, percussive, like, I don't know, just like different new things that are found in modern music and pop music, and just like kind of blending everything together, because I feel like sometimes these worlds feel so separate in music. Yeah.
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 I love that answer. Tony, who would you say?
Dang it, I knew you were going to ask me that. Why did I
Sorry.
talk about
Because you
this?
know me. You know me. You know my insides.
Mm, okay. Um, in the vein of creating new sounds, um, I'm not experienced in this, okay? But my nephew is in a like heavy metal band. Okay. They're working on their first album. They've got some stuff going on. I would love to do like the guitar pedals and like do some cool stuff with them. That would be super fun. But also it's very vulnerable because I am also learning how to improvise and I'm like, this is very scary over here. So it would be so fun. So his band is called Expomon. They're up from Visalia, California. So
He has to see this because the
I
question is
know,
if you could collaborate with any musician living or dead,
I
who would
know.
it be? You're like, my nephew.
I'm saying my nephew.
That's
That's what
so
it's
beautiful.
no
He's gonna
bear.
be like, oh, yeah, yay. That's so sweet. I love that. My nephew. I
Yeah,
would collaborate with my
I
nephew.
want to mess with the pedals. I want to like explore. That would be really fun.
That's awesome.
Cool.
That's awesome. Well,
And
thank
you,
you, Chelsea. Oh,
hold
me?
on, yours.
Oh,
Yeah,
I'm not getting out of this?
no,
Oh, dang.
I know.
Um, so for the last few years, it could have been way longer, but he's only been on my radar for a few years, sadly. I've really just love the work of Max Richter. And I went to hear, I went for multiple reasons, but one huge reason why I really wanted to be there, I went to Dublin in August and I heard his Vivaldi reimagined, Four Seasons recomposed. But I've loved his pieces for, a while. And there's a few composers who are like composing on pure emotion, and he's like one of them. Obviously, there are in the recomposition and reimagining of Four Seasons, there's a lot going on. But really, at the heart of it, like it just sounds like Max Richter. It sounds like his sound, and it's a very, very bass, like if you stripped everything away and made like music just an emotion, which is very different than how like I normally nerd out. So I'm very like attracted to that. And I heard Mari Samuelson and her group perform it, and I just loved it. It was so good. And I'm going to arrange a piece of his for a performance coming up in a few months. And I would love to work with him. I think that would be great. And yeah, he should do some flute stuff.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll send this to him and he'll see it on socials. He needs to do some flute stuff because the string stuff is great, but like we could do some stuff in a flute quartet with his aesthetic, you know? It doesn't have to just work for strings, it can work for us. So yeah, I would say I collaborate with Max.
Okay, now you can wrap it up.
You're not getting out that easy. Chelsea, you're awesome. Thank you for chatting
Awesome.
with us today. This is so good.
Yeah, it's so much fun. I'm so excited. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so thrilled.
Excited.
Brittany's excited that you're going to be there. So
Yeah, I
yeah,
just saw her the other week and she mentioned she was like, "Oh my gosh, it's the best week."
Aw.
She's like, "I needed that for like my soul." So I was like, "All
Well,
right,
we all did. We all did.
yeah."
and
So
we'll need it
like,
again.
and we'll need it again. Highlight of the year. Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Enjoy your week. Hopefully,
Awesome. Thanks,
take care, you
Chelsea.
guys. Bye.
Bye.